Thanks for being on the show, Tim. So Tim is a podcast expert, and we've got him on the show today to go over what it takes to create a podcast, promote it, and make it successful. So welcome to the show, Tim.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, mate. It's very good to be here after a while of chatting about it.
Nice. And so just first question, how long have you been doing this kind of podcasting?
Yeah, well, interestingly enough, I actually started doing interview formats when I was 18. Someone told me that it would be a smart idea. I'm 26 now. Someone told me it was a smart idea to contact people on LinkedIn when I was a university student and go and meet up with professionals that I liked, chief marketing operators, all of that kind of stuff. And I did about 50 interviews just with a notepad and pen. And then fast forward to about 2016 or 2018, sorry, you can then buy recording equipment. And I purchased a Zoom H5 recorder and just set up these similar interviews. But I said, hey, I'm going to record it, because I was walking away from those conversations that weren't recorded going, they needed to be recorded. So that was really what started it, was this kind of curiosity, but then also, hey, why don't I record it and turn it into a podcast? And that's where it started. So I guess started when I was 18 in a really kind of analog format, and then 2018, 2 years ago, I really turned it into a podcast.
Wow. Okay. So for the last couple of years, you've been monetizing this podcast, I'm guessing? Like, this is your job, or so it's less of a hobby now?
Less of a hobby now. So at the back end of last year, a lot of the people that I was interviewing found that they said stuff during the interview that they'd never been able to get on camera before. And just by nature of the podcast style, you get authentic content. It's no longer the selfie video that we all plagued on LinkedIn with. You get content that's a little bit more authentic and engaging. So I decided to turn my interviews into a media production, podcast production company. And basically what I do now is I take people from concept of their podcast all the way through to what they need to do to set up the show, and then actually get some really valuable material from just that 40-minute episode. So yeah, it's to answer your question, it's turned into very much a business.
Very nice.
It's formed out of a passion. So
I like it. Yeah. So I suppose that, that sort of comes to the purpose behind why people start podcasts in the first place. And, as someone who's done a lot of these interviews in the past and probably coached other people, I'm guessing, with starting their podcasts, what do you find are the main reasons why people started? Is it like a narcissistic thing? Like they just want to be a self-promoter, or are they just jumping on a bandwagon right now where we're in sort of virus lockdown, and what else is there to do, right? Or is it curiosity like for you, or is it a mix of things?
It's really funny, right? I think there's an element of the bandwagon portraying itself. Everybody's starting a podcast today. 2020 is a podcast is the answer to what 2012's blog was.
Oh no, is that me right now?
Well, no, because you're actually doing it strategically, right? And we've had you're measured. You do all this stuff, the background into it all. And what I'm seeing that's quite dangerous is people starting a podcast because they think that's the new tactic. They think that's the new thing. They think they need to be doing that as part of, the ever-ending machine of content generation. But the successful podcasts are people that are doing it not because it's a tactic. They're doing it because it's something that a medium they're actually natural in presenting with. And I think that the idea of starting a podcast, for me at least, what I'm seeing a lot of people doing it is because it builds them as an authority, gives them an ability to talk about topics at length, in depth, and in a way that is quite engaging and quite interesting to watch. Like, so I know when I'm
that raises a good point. Like, is this for everyone, or is there people you wouldn't recommend to start a podcast? For example, if people can't talk well or aren't good conversationalists, or what do you think is just a learned skill that you can get better at? Are there people you would not recommend that you've met to ever start a podcast, for example?
If you're not interested in other people, if you're not interested in other people's stories, if you can't ask high quality questions, because that's where the gold is, maybe a podcast isn't for you. That being said, there's still very successful shows where it's just the solo person. My sort of red flag, I guess, would be if you're a person that isn't consistent, as in you can't put something out on a monthly schedule, weekly schedule, or fortnightly schedule, or my schedule at the moment is 2 a week. Then it isn't something for you to do, because it's not a tactic that's going to get you immediate return on investment. It's a long tail tactic that's going to produce you a large amount of content over a long period of time. So the podcast is for someone who can be consistent. It's for someone who's interested in other people. It's also for someone who wants to build a brand. But it isn't for somebody who, if you don't feel comfortable, if it's not your medium, like I don't write blogs. I'm not a blog writer, and I don't do that because that's not my medium. My medium is...
On the other side of that is there's some people who perhaps, have a face for radio, they say. So they're really good talking, but maybe not so good on video. And this came across with me in sales. Like some people are really good with the face-to-face closing of the sale, right? And other people better on the phone. So I'm assuming podcasting can be the same way. But with that said, say you're not good at interviewing people, maybe best not to start a podcast, but would those people be good as like an interviewee on someone else's podcast, for example? Like, do you need to start yours, or can you just leverage other people's?
I think because I'll be a little bit contradictory. I think everybody can start a podcast. I think if you've got an interesting business or an interesting story, you can start. But if you feel like it might be something that's a little bit nervous for you to do yourself as the host, it's a great idea to get on someone else's show as a guest and just see how that format plays out.
So maybe dip your toes in the water or something like that.
Yeah, dip your toes in the water and be a guest. And, me as less so now, because I've got podcasts sitting in the bank that I need to release. I'm not really taking on any new interviews at the moment, but there's a lot of people that are starting their podcasts that are more than happy to take on new interviews and do all of that. So it's a really good space because there's such a volume of shows to get on some podcasts yourself.
Okay, great. So I suppose the next question is like, what about topics? All of us have lots of interest, right? I know I do. There's some things I'd be more comfortable talking about or interested in than others. Do you sort of have any theme or recommendations you give to people? Like, do you start within a small niche, but then you box hold, or do you go wide and sort of talk about lots of things like Joe Rogan, or should you start out small and then get wide? How do you sort of figure out what to talk about in the first place?
Yeah, and you're probably not going to like this answer. It completely depends. It completely depends on the person. So a niched podcast is a fantastic idea because people will search for niche things. They'll be like, I want to search for the basketball podcast. Who's the best basketball show? So you start a basketball show because you're passionate about basketball. Why not? A more generalist show, like I would sort of define my show as a more generalist show, and the name Peak Performers. So Been Talking with Peak Performers was named in such a way that I was walking away from conversations with people that are in the peak of their field. And I wanted these conversations out there. But that means my first 10, 15 shows were all business owners because that was my circle of influence. Like, I'm a marketing student, so I went to talk to chief marketing officers. I went to talk to business owners. Marketing was what I was doing. But because I named mine a little bit broadly, I've now had authors on the show. I've had Paralympians on the show. So I didn't restrict it. I went a little bit more, but I still niched it into the word peak performance. So I wanted to tap into the peak performance mindset. So
that's the theme that sort of ties in everything together, I'm guessing, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's not about one topic, but okay, I get what you mean. So I suppose I found out some other podcasts as well started somewhere, and then, to use the buzzword pivot, they sort of did a bit of experimentation and then went, oh, wow, I'm onto something here with one episode. And they go, everyone got good feedback. And they went, hey, let's double down on this. And like, maybe this is our calling. Did that happen to you as well?
Yeah, and that's a fantastic kind of borrowed strategy from split testing and advertising is you figure out what works. My show was titled Been Talking with Undeniably the Best for a very long time, and that was a very long name and really didn't make any sense and there wasn't any direction. But then I found that there was a consistent theme with every single conversation, and everyone that I was talking to, there was like, oh, these people are really top performers. So I doubled down in on the consistent theme that was going on. Another example, I've got a friend of mine, I'll give his podcast a shout out, called Authentic Conversations. Now, he started out generally and he was like, I don't really know what niche I want to do. But after he did about 3 episodes, he found that every episode had this lean towards mental health, had this lean towards stories of people, managing depression, managing bipolar. And then he also had his parent dealt with bipolar as well. So he was able to come at those conversations from the perspective of being a child that was also affected with someone with mental health. And so therefore the underlying theme that will underpin his whole podcast came out of the first 3 episodes. So
I like it.
If you're getting, I guess the thing to wrap that up there is if you're getting stuck on a niche, it's more about starting and seeing where the conversations go, and then you'll see which ones perform, and then that's how you can pick a niche and go from there. So my biggest thing is people not starting and just having it as an idea that sits on the shelf.
Sure, I like that, and I suppose the next problem is once you've decided on a topic and you've got a basic idea of what you want to talk about, is finding people to talk to. So interviewees, and I've been working on my own personal network. So perhaps myself and you got a couple of years of work under our belt. We know a couple of people in some very diverse areas, and I found running an agency, I've got lots of different clients in very weird areas and suppliers that I can sort of leverage. LinkedIn, I've got 6,500 followers on there, so it's quite easy to reach out and go, hey, we've both been watching each other for a while, why don't you talk about XYZ? But not everyone's in that situation. Maybe you're starting out. What do you recommend for guests, and how to choose them, how to make sure you don't get a dud? Obviously there's a bit of skill to that. What's your sort of strategy around that?
I guess you will get a dud interview, and it just happens. Someone might have an off day or whatever, so don't judge yourself if that happens. In terms of guests, my formula was I started with, very much like you did, started with my circle of influence. And then at the end of every episode, it's like, okay, who should I interview next? Who should I interview next? And then I found
you asked the interviewee who you'd recommend. Okay, great.
Yeah, especially at the end of the show, and they get the style of questions, they get how you run, they understand. Okay, well, your show's about this, so who do I know in that space that I can recommend? And that's what I would then do to get guests, is start with your immediate circle, especially if it's a new podcast, because sometimes if you were to go for like a bigger name celebrity and then they only see that there's 2 episodes out, I don't want to discourage anyone from reaching out, because you definitely do need to do that. That's how I got Jim Penman on the show.
So just for everyone else, who was Jim Penman?
Yeah, sorry. So Jim Penman is the founder of Jim's Group, Jim's Mowing, Jim's Cleaning, Jim's freaking everything.
Which are a big sort of trade sort of franchise or home services?
Big franchise. Yeah, one of the biggest franchise groups in Australia.
Okay. So how did you get him then? I mean, did that just sort of come out of the blue, or?
No, I was very strategic about that. I engaged with their content for a very long period of time. And then after building up a relationship, I then sent an email to him and said, hey, I'm based in Melbourne. What would be the process of me setting up an interview with you, and how can we do that? And then there was a bit of back and forth with his management team and all that kind of stuff. But they would have looked at my profile, right? They would have gone, okay, is this a serious podcast? Okay, yeah, I see he's consistently posting things. Cool. Reply and have him on. And he was very open to being interviewed, which was fantastic. But I think what actually got me that interview was the fact that I had a podcast that it was at least 30 episodes in. And then it's like, okay, well, this is a serious thing. So that's why I say start with your network first, and then branch out from there. Now, the counter argument to that would be, if I just interview someone who I've done work with for a long period of time and not many other people know him, who will care? I haven't really found that that's been much difference. If you title the episode correctly, if there's actually valuable content in there, my average listener base has been the same. I mean, yes, there's been more listens on Jim Penman's one, but for the rest of them, it's been fairly consistent. So it's more about the consistency of getting those shows under your belt. And then when you're at episode 20, episode 30, reaching out to someone that is a little bit bigger and going, hey, what would be the process to getting you on my show? And I think building a relationship with someone before asking them, it's kind of like basic sales as well.
Yeah. So sort of take the long burn approach.
That's something I would recommend. Don't just cold email people. Like I cold emailed Janine Ellis, and then the response I got back was, oh, look, she's busy with all of her Shark Tank things, which is fair enough. But I didn't build up a relationship with her like I did with Jim. Yeah. So I made a mistake there, I guess.
So maybe start out small with some people you're comfortable with, build a following, get consistent, and then sort of have that long-term vision. The sales process for the big fish to land will take a little bit of effort, right? Definitely. Okay.
Especially because there's so many podcasts out there as well. Like they'll be getting interview requests. I think right now is a good time to actually re-ask those people. We had that conversation yesterday. Maybe I should, like with all the speaking engagements drying up, like maybe now is a good time to get a bigger guest on. So
yeah, exactly.
Especially with
I mean, these people can't go to physical events anymore, can they? So they're all sitting at home at night, doing work. So, I mean, that's my strategy. So I'm glad I got you in a space of time. I know it took us a couple of times, but no, it's good.
Don't worry, man. I would have made the time for you. Don't worry.
Nice, thanks. Hey, so I suppose coming to that, we've got a guest, we've got a topic. Do you do some prep before the guest comes on board? I mean, I know obviously we know each other, and I've sort of looked into your past. We've had discussions, and I did a bit of a prelim interview with you and just seeing what things we could talk about. And then, I've written a bit of a run sheet that's, I can talk off the cuff, but I do like a bit of structure for me to then have talking points that, we can then go through. So that's what I'm doing right now. But I mean, would you suggest something similar for the first time, or do you just find some people are natural, some people aren't?
Again, I'll say the classic, it depends. It depends on you and what you like doing. You are clearly a process-driven person and you like to have a structure. That works really well. But for me, I don't do any preparation at all. I just found that I ask questions that elicit a response that gets people to create an amazing answer. And that's just a skill set that I've identified that I have. Not trying to sort of back off, but I've just found that if I try to prepare too much, and I've done shows where I'm actually producing a different show where I'm the interviewer on the show, but the guy that I'm producing the show for, he wants me to script out every single question, and we do that. But what happens is, and it's a very cool process for me to watch the different podcasts, because when I'm doing a podcast where I've got every single question mapped out, I'm not actually in the interview. I'm focusing on, what's the next question for me to ask? Versus if I just go in with a curious mindset, I'll do a little bit of research on who they are. I'm not stupid. Like I'll look at what the content they put out. I'll go on their LinkedIn. What are they talking about? So I'll come in with questions that I know I'm interested about. But if I've over prepared too much, it means that the conversation just sounds formulaic. And I don't get a really genuine response. I'm not able to ask that question deeper. So in terms of research, I do a bit of surface level stuff. But apart from that, that's my formula has been pretty much just go in with a curious mind and a conversation. But it completely depends. If you know that if you're not structured and you don't have some topic points, and you're going to get lost in the interview, then, do a little bit more research. So it depends on the person and who you are. Personally, I've found that I don't do, and I know that was like probably 2 months before we did our podcast, you were like, all right, can you send me some questions? And I was like, John, I don't do that.
And then I was like, who is this guy? Yeah.
Who is this guy? But then I was like, look, it's okay. And what I've started to do now is that pre-conversation, because if someone like you wants those questions, like I tell people, I'm not 60 minutes here. I'm not trying to like uncover some dirt on you. And I think that's why people like to have questions prepared. but I like to have that pre-conversation, and it was really good. That's what we actually ended up doing. We had a pre-conversation about, okay, what do you want to talk about? What would you like weaved into the conversation? But I didn't give you 20 questions to answer.
And I suppose it depends how familiar you are with the topic you talk about. Like, when people interview me, I know lots about the topic. I can talk, and it's very natural. And if they do as well, it's really easy to talk about things. So, from my perspective, I didn't really know anything about podcasting, hence why it's a good episode to talk about, and it's useful for me and for perhaps some other people that may be thinking about starting. So I suppose, and that comes down to, I'm sure the viewers can see we've both got mics in front of us, right? You've got headphones, I've got like a little earpiece in. If you're just starting out, say you don't have a lot of cash, what kind of equipment should we be buying at a very base level?
Yeah, well, I'll chuck my right hook in there and say I've got a PDF document of equipment to make this process simple.
We can put that in the links maybe. But tell me, what do you have in front of you?
Just to give you some value, I don't like people getting caught up on equipment. As I said, I started my show with just this recorder. This cost me about $340. Basically, it's a Zoom for people that aren't listening on, a Zoom H5 recorder. This gave me the ability to start podcasts because it has 2 microphones on the top. But then when I wanted to upgrade to, the setup that I've got now, which is on camera, the pod mics and that, it gave me ability to plug in these XLR microphones, which is what this is. Now, that's when, once you've got started, you can then invest in the gear. I only did this last year, the start of this year. So equipment comes down to not overthinking it. Start out with a budget you feel comfortable with. A USB microphone, especially in the times that we live in. I think your microphone there only cost you about $89, but you're getting a fantastic sound quality. My setup, you asked what setup do I have. I've got a Rode, a podcast mic that's in a shock mount, and I've got a boom arm as well to get the microphone as close to my mouth as possible. Now, even that's a bit overkill. A really good start out, USB microphone, something like the Rode NT USB Mini, about 149 Australian dollars, just plugs into your USB port, and it gives you such a better audio quality than just your computer, right?
Yeah, sure. I've listened to some podcasts, and the mic quality of the interview is very tinny, and you lose that bass, and that sort of softness of audio, I've noticed. But apart from that, if the content's good, like you said, does it really matter? My video on this is terrible. I'm going to have to touch that up later, right? Because I'm using an old laptop with a terrible webcam. But if what you talk about is good, does it really matter?
Yeah, if what you talk exactly, it's the quality of the content, not how produced it is. And I set a status. Literally, you can start a podcast with $250 if you buy the right microphone set and all that kind of stuff. I just don't want people overthinking equipment, because you can spend thousands of dollars on microphones, but if your content isn't any great, then you're not even going to be using these microphones to the best of its ability. So yeah,
I suppose it's that old adage, right? It's not the tools, it's how you use it, and I think the same could be said for this. And in marketing, definitely the same thing. Like some people get caught up in the martech. Oh, I use this CRM or that CRM, and really, people who know what they're doing don't care too much about what's used. It's more about, does it work for what I want to do, and looking at the outcome, sort of the output. Yeah. So I suppose, okay, we've recorded a podcast, we've interviewed someone, found a guest list, we've got an equipment set up. Next step is, okay, what do we do next? We've recorded the podcast. Maybe we're using Zoom or something like that. Obviously, we're using that right now. Everyone knows what it is now. A couple of weeks ago, maybe less people knew. So, that's an easy thing to use. Is there other ways and other software once we're recording and want to produce the podcast itself that you'd recommend?
Yeah, it's actually very interesting. I got off a call last night where somebody was saying that because Zoom is being used so much at the moment, the audio quality of file that you get from Zoom actually may not be the best because there's so many people using the servers, right? But Zoom is a great one because everybody knows it. It's really sort of user friendly, and I've got around the audio problems by just doing some post production work. So Zoom is the platform that I'd recommend, especially if you just want to get started. You don't want to upgrade into other platforms. And I haven't used anything different. I've interviewed people internationally. I've interviewed people interstate, and I've always used Zoom for it. In terms of other software, when I first started to edit my videos, I was using Camtasia. I've now upgraded to the Adobe Premiere Pro in the Adobe Suite.
And that's a video there's just suite, isn't it, or Adobe Premiere?
Yeah, it's video, but it also has a audio compressor in it. So there's actually a lot you can do to adapt the audio within Premiere Pro.
So if you don't if you can't fork out that much money, say it's $50 a month or whatever it is, what's the sort of cheaper option?
Look, Audacity is a free thing. Pro Tools First is another free. They've got a freemium model that you can use to edit audio. But I think, where I started was Camtasia, and I think that was just an outright cost of $300. Again, they have a very basic audio compressor in there. You can level out the audio. You can adjust it. You can fade things in. You can fade things out. So I've used Camtasia for a lot of my editing as well.
Oh, great. Okay. And do you put a soundtrack with it, or what are we talking about? Like stock footage, or stock audio that you put in there and get a little sound bite? Or I've seen people like on Instagram, not a huge fan, but like Gary V and people like Kerwin Ray and some of those, guys that are doing lots of production. They have this like little logo that will pop up and a little of a sound bite that you hear, like a click or a boom.
I've done that twice.
Yeah.
Actually, look, I don't know if I'll get in trouble for this. And maybe I shouldn't be saying this, but what I did on 2 of my videos was Gary has this like forp sound. It's like he says like a little bit of a sound bite of, maybe 2 minutes into the talk. It's like, this is why you need to use social media or else you're dead. And then it'll do that forp sound, right? And then he'll go into the intro. I've done that twice. And how I did it was I actually screen recorded one of his videos, and I just separated the audio of that forp sound. And I did the same thing. I just basically stole that from me. I don't know if the microsecond of sound is copyrightable, but I did that. I copied that from me because you look at what the successful people are doing and you emulate it. Sure. It took a little bit longer to edit it because then I figured out I needed to get a screenshot because the shot needed to go still as well. There's just a little bit more post-production in it. Maybe I can link to the video that I did.
What about intro music or something like that, and outro music? I've seen it very. So
that's a little bit more. Yeah, that's a little bit more simple. I used Epidemic Sounds or something, but the mistake I made there was I then had to buy the license to the music that I was using, and that license was about $300 or something. Even though their advertising was free music, they still made me pay for the license. Which, fair enough. Look, you got to pay creatives for their work. And now I use a system called Artlist. They've got a whole range of songs that I can use, and it helps me out not only for my work. I'm still going to use the original soundtrack that I bought because I paid for it, so I'm using the same music. But I'll have that music playing underneath the outro. So I found that if you do introduce the show, so I go, all right, hello and welcome to the Bean Talking with Peak Performers podcast. On this podcast, we talk to peak performers in their field so you can go perform at your best. This episode, we got John on the show. Sorry, John. We got John on the show. He's a marketing expert and really fascinating guy. I'll do a quick intro, but underneath that intro will be music playing because if it's just your voice, I find that the feeling is a little bit different. You want a little bit of music there to get people excited in the show.
Sure.
Finding some music to go under the intro and under the outro. I also use it in snippet pieces at the end as well. Music is something that can really add another dynamic to your show.
I like it. Okay, good. And look, maybe we'll put some links to the bottom of this podcast with some stock sort of sites you can go to and buy little tracks and have a play around. I know I was using Canva just yesterday. Not Canva, Clipchamp. This Brisbane sort of web browser based video editing software, and they have a lot of stock audio and stock footage that I can use as tracks. Okay. And obviously they've paid for the licenses with the subscription that I've paid, but I'm sure I could use those, and there's other sites around there. So I'll put that.
Yeah, there's a lot of sites. Yeah, and there's a lot of sites that'll give you like a subscription-based thing, and I think music is even if you watch the people that are producing a large volume of content, they'll like if you listen to it, they'll have music underneath it playing, and I think there's some psychological thing that we just like hearing music, and it just adds a little bit more than just voice. I don't recommend putting music under your entire podcast. That wouldn't be a good idea. But when you're doing the snippet-based content, having some music is not a bad idea. I don't do it with all of my bits of content, but maybe I'll start doing it. It's just something I'd like to test. And now that I've got a subscription, like it sounds like you do, like you've got access to all of that music. So
yeah, exactly. So okay, so we've got a topic, we've got guests, we've recorded it, we've got software, we've produced it, it's ready to go, ready to ship. Now how do we distribute it? How do we get it out there? And this is maybe a two-pronged thing. Is it distribution, or is it promotion, or a combination of both? Like I actually don't know this area whatsoever, so I'm actually genuinely asking this question to you. Like I've heard of these things, like some people use Spotify, some people use iTunes, SoundCloud. Like how does that get on there in the first place? Is it you just go to those sites and upload it, or is there a third-party system? Like give us a quick sort of overview without getting too technical.
Yeah. Good. I don't want to confuse everybody with the details, but first of all, it's a combination of distribution and promotion. You can distribute it on iTunes and Spotify, but if you don't promote the fact that you've got a podcast and don't tell anyone about it, no one's going to listen to it. I've actually tested this, right? I've put podcasts out where I haven't actually promoted, and it gets some listens, but so it's a combination of promotion and distribution. How you actually distribute the podcast now, I'll go into a bit of the secret sauce here, but you can find it with a Google search. Anchor is what I use, because you need to get an RSS feed. RSS feed is just a bit of code which Spotify, iTunes, all these platforms read.
I remember, just to interrupt there. I remember RSS feeds back in the day when there's news, like curated news feeds you could do for like topic areas and stuff. Is that the same thing you're talking about, or?
Yeah, I think it's similar. It's similar to that. Again, I'm not 100% sure on that, but all I know is it's an RSS feed that you put into a third-party provider like Anchor, which then Anchor distributes the podcast to Spotify, iTunes, Podbean, Podcaster, Castbox. There's about 10 other platforms that I've got my Google Podcasts. So the good thing about Anchor is it's actually owned by Spotify as well. So the episode gets uploaded on Spotify very quickly, and you get a lot of data and stats and statistics to you. I know that 82% of my audience is males between the ages of 28 and 35. I know that because of the data that Anchor gives me. Best thing about Anchor is it's free as well. Now, the consideration that you've got to make is if a product is free, you'll eventually be the product, i.e. Facebook, Sure. So there are other services like Libsyn. I used Libsyn for a very long time to create my RSS feed. But again, it just came down to a matter of financial capability for me. Anchor was a free service. Libsyn was paid.
So speaking about that, like where do most of the people listen to podcasts? Is it on iTunes because they have, an Apple account, or is it on Spotify? What's your what do you think? Like if we have to narrow it down.
Yeah. The two big ones are iTunes and Spotify. 51% of my audience is on iTunes. 28% around about is on Spotify.
Wow.
And then the rest of the percentages is made up over Google and whatever. So iTunes is the real beast.
What about YouTube though?
Yeah, YouTube. So a real pain point for me is I've only uploaded about 16 of my 42 episodes on YouTube. So I don't personally have enough data to give you a good answer on that one. But YouTube is definitely a big space for it. That's where Joe Rogan took off. I strongly believe that's where he took off. There's a big trend in people putting YouTube videos on in the background and then just doing their work, right? So the reason why I say it's a pain point for me that I've only put 16 episodes up there is because YouTube is an incredibly powerful platform to put your podcast on as well. And if you're going to start a podcast tomorrow, and John, I know you're recording these episodes to have a launch strategy. As soon as you upload them on your iTunes account, on your Spotify account, same day put them on YouTube as well, because if it's one thing that I've learnt and a pain point for me is I didn't do that, and now I'm chasing my tail to go back into my files and then find it, and it just adds extra work that you don't need. So yeah, it's incredibly powerful to put it on YouTube because
you mentioned before, like promotion though, like, you know, uploading, like you said, uploading it is one part, but like, how do you promote it? And like, if you don't have cash, if you do have cash, if you got like, do you got an email list, or how does all that work?
If you have an email list, definitely create an email that you've got a podcast out, and every single week do your email. One of the podcasts that I produce, Home Loan Hacks, they had a really good email database. So when they launched, they were able to go, hey, here's our podcast. And that gave them some listeners to start off with. I didn't start with an email list. I don't know why. Marketing mistake. I just didn't have one. So in terms of promotion, what I did was created the assets. I created a Facebook page. I created an Instagram page. Created, YouTube, which wasn't used, but I created it. And then what I do is I take probably a snippet from the episode that really hit home, that was really valuable, that people could actually do, and then I did some post-production. I did editing. So yes, this makes the job a little bit harder to do your podcast, but that's actually how you promote it. Is you'll get something really good from the show that's 3 minutes long, share it on your LinkedIn, share it on your Instagram, share it on your Facebook, and consistently people will listen to those snippets and then go, oh, that was really good. I'm going to go listen to the entire interview. And then, of course,
snippets, you mean like a little segment of the entire podcast? You'll take a little, a gold nugget kind of part out and create this little short video or sound bite, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay. Oh, great. 100%. Okay, so email list, you obviously got one now, I'm guessing, and you've got a bit of a social media following here and there. LinkedIn, I see you, LinkedIn and Facebook, you're pretty active on. And I suppose, do you cross-promote with maybe the interviewee has their own list, and then that's something they can project out to their own followers, and then vicariously you'll pick up a couple more? Or where are you getting all your followers from?
It is mainly LinkedIn, Facebook. I haven't ran any ads. Well, I ran one or two ads to the content to build audience that way. But yeah, and use your guest audience too. Like as soon as you publish the episode, send them a message and go, hey, our episode is out. Here's the iTunes link. Here's the Spotify link. And here's a clip from the episode. If you share that as well, that would be really great. And just ask them to share it. Nice. So yeah, you leveraging your guest audience as well is a fantastic way to grow too.
Okay, awesome. Look, that's all the sort of things I had to ask you about podcasting specifically. But I mean, maybe just give us some intro into your background, where you're going to head in the future. Obviously you're doing this podcasting as a bit of a sort of B2B service offering right now. What was your background before that, and where are you heading in the future?
Yeah, thanks. Good question to ask. So I've completed a marketing degree from Monash University. Via completing that degree, I was also working as a business development manager. So I had a lot of experience in sales and loved that consumer behavior side of things, of how to get people's attention on a 30-second cold call. That's
a good skill, by the way.
Yeah, thank you. It's good fun. My background is very strongly in marketing, and I see that a podcast is a part of an overall content strategy. So what I'm building out at the moment is been talking as a media agency, but podcast production and content creation, where one podcast can get you anywhere between, depending on your content release strategy, 1 to 3 months worth of video content in about 45 minutes of your time.
Sorry, 1 to 3 months. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So we were talking about those snippets before, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, you can get one to advertise the podcast, but there'll be things that are said. There's things said during this interview even that I could take and then I could redistribute across social media channels in email marketing campaigns. Like a blog post as well. Yeah. Or? So say I had a cashback guarantee, right? And blog post is another thing as well. I'll get to that. But if I had a cashback guarantee and I go onto a podcast and they ask me a question like, how do I guarantee customer satisfaction? And then I talk about all about my fantastic guarantee and how I make it a win-win situation. If I'm having a sales conversation with somebody and they're a little bit on the fence and we've had that meeting, and I can sort of sense that it went well, but like, you know, certainty wanes, and probably in a week, they're probably going to be like, oh, I thought about it and it wasn't for me. If I could create a cashback guarantee video from a podcast and I could go, hey, you know, I noticed that we had a good meeting, but I just want to tell you how I can make this a win-win situation if we do business together. Here's a video that I did on my cashback guarantee. Have a watch of it. And that's a bit of content that you can grab from a podcast and then distribute it in an email format that then would get that person to go, okay.
So
cool,
let's get this straight. You're using this in a sales context. Like, and what do you mean by cashback guarantee?
Oh, that was just an example that I was using. If somebody had a cashback guarantee, they could talk about it on a podcast. Okay. It could be a different example as well. So say you were talking about you had to go into depth. You've got a really scientific platform or process. You had to go into depth. Why not get your best salesperson to go onto a podcast and talk about the benefits, features, and products about your product? Oh. Now you've got your salesperson in a digital format that you can use in so many other areas as well.
Wow. Okay. You know? So let me get this straight. Like, if you did this interview with a sales guy, you could then take little snippets of like customer objections in the sales process or common questions they answer, and then put that into YouTube or put it in your sales automation sequence and all that kind of thing.
And I wouldn't do it in a tokenistic way, like, you know, creating a fake sales scenario. But, you know, you've all been in sales meetings, and the top producing salesperson will explain an objection or something, or get over something that just goes, yeah, why isn't more people buying our product? If you can record that in a podcast format, do it naturally. Like, don't, as I say, there's a fine balance between doing it tokenistically and doing it like in a good way. But imagine if you can digitalize your best salesperson so that can go out in email campaigns, so that can go out on social media. These is all stuff that I'm seeing, you know, people I'm working with do, and gives a podcast such a bigger variety of avenues to go in.
I like it. Okay, no, that's really good. I mean, I hadn't thought about that before. And I suppose, you know, if we're recording this podcast like we are now on video, you know, you've got video content as well as audio content. And that's so versatile, isn't it? Like, if you don't have the content to start with, you can't produce these things easily. You got to get an agency to do a script and a screenplay and interview people and some B-roll footage. And if you already have the interview section, you kind of got a leg up, don't you? And when it comes time to produce the video that for whatever purpose that you're doing. Yeah. You know, that's really great.
And that's sort of what I'm building here. We've been talking is it's like, okay, even if you're not a solid podcaster, just thinking about the ability for that content to be used in so many other ways. Like you said, blogs before, you can take a transcript of this blog and say, these are the steps to starting a podcast. Or, you know, I could take a transcript from a blog I did from a financial professional talking about COVID-19. It's like financial professional talks about saving your money through COVID, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Blog formats is something you can do. Taking snippets of, like, I haven't done this yet, but this is something I want to do. Taking a quote that was said in the episode and putting it in an Instagram thing. I know you're not a big quote person, but and you put one out a few weeks ago. You're like,
no, I do like good quotes. I just find, like, you know, the motivational poster types, the same quote you see, like the Steve Jobsy ones. You're like, oh, I've seen that like 100 million times. I like the ones that are maybe a bit less known. You know, that really sum up the situation. But sorry, go on.
And what's better not known than something that someone just said in a podcast that if it makes the interviewer go, wow, remember what you said, you know, and that can be used in such a great way.
Sure. So maybe I'll have some good quotes for you after this podcast. So I suppose
hopefully,
So that is your company. That's what you're doing. You know, I'll put the links in the description below, and everything about the PDF that you mentioned about, you know, starting your own podcast. So I think a lot of people would be, you know, interested in that, and then they can get in contact with you, obviously. But you know, if you that is your way of designing a course, I suppose, that teaches people about podcasting, dip the toe in the water, and then once they realize how hard it is, they'll hire someone to help them out, right?
Yeah. There's a wealth of content you can do, and doing it all yourself is noble and yeah, great stuff. But yeah, sometimes if you can give the content to a producer like myself that can really get the gold from an episode, that's something that I've found really valuable for people producing their show on an ongoing basis. Yeah.
Okay, so we're nearly at the end, but one little question I had was, what's something very few people know about you? We've talked at length about where you've come from and some of the issues you've encountered, but is there something quirky about you that would be very interesting?
Good question. I like it. I might go a little bit deep and meaningful because I'm. People do know this about me, but you wouldn't know it in the 40 minutes that we've spoken about. So I've gone through a lot with manic depression and bipolar. I really kind of have learnt a lot through that process of managing mental health, and especially at a time through COVID where we're social isolation and everything, it's more important than ever to look after your mental health. And I guess the way that I frame up what I've got is so depression gives me a level of insight, knowledge, and lessons into myself that a lot of people can't tap into. And the mania side of things gives me a level of motivation, passion, energy, and creativity that some people can't tap into either, just because that's the brain chemistry. Like this podcast was based, I started it off the back end of a depressive episode, and then I was coming up really quite positive. So the creativity and everything came back. So, I was using that as a positive. And I know you maybe probably asking that question there for a quirky-ish answer, but I guess I wanted to give a more background into the mental health side of things, and obviously people out there that are going through isolation at the moment, and understanding that, there's help out there. And that's something that's really helped me as well, is sticking up my hand and going, hey, I need some help. So look, a lot of people don't, we've known each other for a few years, and I think you asked me you were going to do this question. I was like, yeah, I'm happy to open up about mental health a little bit, because people just don't know it. So
no, that's great. I mean, I work with a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of business people, and I don't think entrepreneurship and business ownership is glorified, in the media and general discussion. But if you've ever met anyone that runs a business, like it is intense. You'll get these severe highs and severe lows, and not that I'm diagnosed with bipolar, but like sometimes that would be accentuated in those circumstances. It'll crack even the most resolute person, and I think it's something that a lot of business people talk about, is like physical health, and that playing into mental health and having that perseverance and determination, which is really required, because you'll be tested. You have a client doesn't pay, you'll have an employee that steals from you or something like that, and have lawyers trying to sue you. Like there's a lot that can trigger people. So no, I think it's there's not many people I haven't met in business who don't actively improve their mental health and take measures around that. So I think it's a really good thing to talk about, and remove some of that stigma, and I think it's getting better.
Definitely,
that's great.
No, and thank you for giving me the platform to talk about it, because I guess that's the other thing, people don't know about me. The fun side of things people don't know about me a lot is I've got a twin brother. He's got a lot more hair than me, and he got the hair gene. So if you ever see photos of him on social media, So that, I guess on a happier note, that's the other thing.
That's great. So if people want to get in contact with you, what's the best way? LinkedIn, you said you're active on, email. Obviously, we'll put some links at the bottom of this episode. But what's the best way if we wanted to just ask a quick question to you?
Yeah, LinkedIn is probably the best format. So Tim Beanland, Beanland. Fantastic spot. I'll pretty answer to a question pretty quickly there. My email is tim@beantalking.com.au. And I've also got a free Facebook group that I've started over the last month called How to Start a Podcast. Got about 150 members in there now. So yeah, go and join that. I'm sharing a bunch of tips and tricks and things in there about podcasting and things I'm learning on a daily basis. So those are probably the 3 best areas to go to.
Great. Okay. And well, on that note, who do you think I should interview next? Have you got any recommendations? You kind of know what I do already. So
Yeah. There's a few people. A guy in Perth called Paul Raimondo. I did a really good podcast of him in terms of Facebook ads. Really smart guy. I think you two as both marketers will get along. And he's just a great guy to interview. He's probably one that would fit your format. Who else is good? Yeah, he'd be the one, the top of mind one that I think I could see if I could email Jim Penman, see if I can get him for you.
Maybe he's not very busy right now. Like everyone's mowing their own lawns, right? So
I know that the Jim's mowing aspect of the business is still going really well. So maybe we can have a chat about getting him on for you.
Oh, that's great. Well, look, Tim, thanks again for, I think it's almost time. So yeah, thanks again for, getting in touch and I know you've interviewed me, so it's the least I could do to interview you back. And I think, in this era of people starting their own podcasts, there was some real good nuggets in there for, how to think about getting your toes in the water and some choices to make. And obviously, we'll direct people to your Facebook page and that PDF you mentioned, that will maybe fill in some of the tactical, execution things that they need to be aware of. So thanks again, and I'm sure we'll speak again soon.
We will do. Thanks, man.
All right.